Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial for the opening ceremony of the reading of the names. Please welcome the founder and president of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, Mr. Jan Scruggs.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, this is a very historic day. It's a very meaningful day for an awful lot of people. This will be a very emotional day. But we commemorate those who took part in the events that began on September 11, 2001. On that day, thousands of Americans, thousands in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Washington, were killed by terrorists. And I heard the explosion and actually saw the smoke rising from the Pentagon on that day. And to me, I felt like I was at Pearl Harbor, that this was a really big event. And I suspected there would be some military activity before long. But for over a decade, a very small percentage of Americans have struggled and sacrificed. And many of these people have done multiple tours in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, it was a lot easier during the Vietnam War because people like me and others, we could just volunteer for 2 years, and after our military service was over, we never had to put on a uniform again. It was all done for us. But the people who we're honoring today, those who gave their lives and those who returned, many of these people have had to do multiple tours back and forth to Iraq, Afghanistan, back and forth. And it's pretty tough. Today we reread the names of the fallen. It is proper that we do this, and in so doing, we also remember all who served and their families. It is said that while our military went to war, America went to the shopping mall. Well, indeed, I mean, what that really says is most people really weren't even inconvenienced by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There was nothing anyone really had to do unless you were in the military or a civilian serving in these wars. So we hope the reading of these names will bring ongoing recognition of the sacrifices. Our nation really does care. I've seen our troops welcomed home in airports, and the idea of reading the names began 32 years ago when the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated. We read all 58,000 names and have done so on 4 other occasions. Today we read the names of America's fallen from different wars. You know, it seemed to me that the time was right to do this. I've been thinking about it for a couple of years. So I sought some advice from my advisors, Ambassador Karen Hughes and General David Petraeus. And, you know, they both said, you know, this is the right time. So I told Secretary Hagel that I made a decision, and now we're going to read all the names. And now we're all here, and we're going to read the names. It's going to be a great day. And that's how things are done in Washington. You just, boom. I have an idea, okay. But I really have no particular insight on how history may judge these wars. I'm just here to honor the people who served. And this is the right place, because in the Education Center at the wall, the photographs of our casualties from Iraq, Afghanistan, OAF, other places, will be an integral part of the experience. And this will be one day, every hour we're going to show the photographs of the casualties. And this will really be a gathering place for these veterans, along with the Vietnam veterans. You know, we're here to welcome them back. So let me read a poem now as I close with my always brief remarks. Written by a veteran of World War I. He became the Librarian of Congress. His name was Archibald MacLeish. This is his poem. The young dead soldiers do not speak. Nevertheless, they are heard in still houses. Who has not heard them? They have a silence that speaks for them at night and when the clock counts. They say we were young. We have died. Remember us. They say our deaths are not ours. They are yours. They will mean what you make them. They say whether our deaths were for peace or for nothing, we cannot say. It is you who must say this. They say We leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning. We were young, they say. We've died. Remember us. In closing, I would like to speak, if I could, to these people who gave their lives fighting for our country in the past 10, 12 years, and just say to them, you know what? This is your day. This is your place. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as the Armed Forces Color Guard, United States Army Military District of Washington, present the colors. And now, to sing our national anthem, please welcome Nashville recording artist, Army veteran, and former member of the 82nd Airborne Division, Mr. Rocky Lynn.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
To lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, representatives of the American Gold Star Mothers.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing as the colors are retired. Once again, Jan Scruggs.
Wasn't watching my notes quite as closely as I should have. Well, back in March 1982, a young and handsome Chuck Hagel stood about right here to deliver a speech at the groundbreaking for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. At the time, he was working for a great president named Ronald Reagan, and we all remember him. And but Chuck Hagel was doing good work for him in many areas. And since then, he's remained a good friend. He was actually a chairman of the 10th anniversary of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in 1992. And then he told me, he says, you know what, I think I've always wanted to be a U.S. Senator. I'm just going to go do it. And boom, he goes to Nebraska and becomes a U.S. Senator, very successful. But he gets bored with jobs. He just got bored with it. He just didn't want to be a senator anymore. So he started doing other things. And then the President of the United States asked him, said, look, we need a Secretary of Defense with your understanding of international events, of international affairs. You would be the perfect guy for the Secretary of Defense. So he said, okay, I'll be the Secretary of Defense. And this is not the kind of job that most people would really want. It's kind of 24/7, and right now, every time I pick up the newspaper, there's another war about to break out, or some terrorists are blowing something up, and it's just a very dangerous world we live in. But through all of it, we can feel good. We have a Secretary of Defense who's grounded, who's been there. He was seriously wounded in Vietnam. Actually, with his brother, they were actually wounded in the same incident. So he always has that. And when it comes to committing U.S. troops to fight somebody, it's got to be a real emergency. We have the right guy in that job. And he's become a very respected figure internationally. He serves our nation very, very well. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Charles T. Hagel. Thank you. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thanks. Jan, thank you. Jan, you make everything sound so easy. It just happens. As we all know here this morning, things don't just happen. And I want to begin with acknowledging the leadership of Jan Scruggs and many sitting here in the front row who began this magnificent journey of building a Vietnam Veteran Memorial many, many years ago. And to you, Jan, and to your board and co-founders, we continue to acknowledge you and thank you for what you do for all of us. And I think this event this morning, recognizing a very special group of individuals, is further testimony to what you started long, long time ago. And those of us who've had the privilege of being part of that acknowledge it and are grateful for the opportunity to be part of what you started. So to Jan, thank you. I also want to use this moment to acknowledge and put endorsement in for the continued efforts of many of you here to finally get this education center built here at the Vietnam Veteran Memorial. I know so many of you continue to work it, and we'll continue to be involved, Jan, and support you on this. It needs to be done. We're close, so we need to push it over the line, and we'll do it. I also today want to acknowledge some of America's most respected and most effective military leaders over a number of years, General McCaffrey, General Petraeus, General Casey, for your contributions and your leadership and what you've meant to our country. We thank you, as well as other veterans who are here and who have done so much and given so much to this country and continue to contribute in very important ways for all of us. At a defining time in our world, a time when the world is reorienting. It is going through a process of building a new world order. Probably we've not seen anything quite like this since after World War II. So this is an important time. This is a time for all of our leaders to step forward. And the wisdom and experience that we have not just represented here, but in our country today is as probably significant as we've ever had in our society. And to bring that together and listen to our leaders is particularly important. I want to acknowledge our friends from Australia here, our allies and partners and friends who have been with the United States in all of our wars, all of our efforts. And to you, sir, and your country, we thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate, in particular, the opportunity to join you here at this special memorial, this special commemoration, this special event this morning to honor and remember the more than 6,800 American service members who've given their last full measure of devotion over the last 13 years to this country. It is right, as Jan Scruggs noted, that we gather to read the names who have fallen from our most recent wars at this wall. And as we all know, this wall records the names of a previous generation of Americans who fought and died on a distant battlefield. Whether they patrolled the jungles of Vietnam, the streets of Fallujah, or the mountain paths of the Korengal Valley, they are the quiet heroes who served and who died in the service of something greater than themselves, the service of their country. Speaking at this memorial on Veterans Day in 1988, President Ronald Reagan said, "Our nation itself is testimony to the love our veterans have had for it, our country, and for us. Our liberties, our values, all for which America stands is safe today because brave men and women have been ready to face the fire at freedom's front." These brave men and women also fought for another ideal, one that has remained constant across generations of America fighting men and women. They fought to safeguard the lives of their comrades in arms. I had the honor to serve alongside some of those quiet heroes in Vietnam, as many of you did. And I have the privilege of meeting and working with these quiet heroes every day as Secretary of Defense. They consider themselves ordinary people. They view themselves that way because they are humble, they are patriotic, and they are selfless. But those who marched off to serve their country are far from ordinary. They never asked for nor expected anything in return for their service other than respect and dignity. Unlike many in my generation, today's veterans return to a country that truly, truly appreciates their service and recognizes the sacrifices they've made for all of us. They are treated with dignity, respect, and appreciation that they have earned and they deserve. As the United States winds down the longest period of sustained combat in our nation's history, America's obligations to those who answered the call to serve, more than 2 million Americans, are only just beginning. This nation has a sacred obligation to take care of them and their families for however long is necessary. It is part of the compact that we make with those who step forward to safeguard our freedom. Caring for these returning veterans, those who bear the visible and the invisible scars and wounds of war, is a solemn responsibility for America. Whether the names of the fallen are etched on this wall behind me or are spoken today, their spirit, their lives, each live on. We will never forget them. We must not forget them. As Civil War veteran and former Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said once many Memorial Days ago, "Our dead brothers still live for us, and they bid us think of life today, not death, of life to which in their youth they lent the passion and joy of their spring." This Memorial Day, as we honor our fellow countrymen who sacrificed everything, we strive to be worthy of their great sacrifices as we all work toward making a better future for all mankind. God bless you all. Thank you all for your continued service to this country. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of it this morning. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vietnam veteran, the former director of the White House Office of Drug Policy, and retired U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey.
Secretary Hagel, let me start by thanking you for those comments, for your own leadership and your example to all of us. And is to tell people that I survived combat tours as a lieutenant and captain because I learned how to listen to sergeants. It's nice having a non-commissioned officer, combat veteran, as Secretary of Defense. So many other people acknowledge. Jan Scruggs, for starters, he's devoted his life to creating the memorialization of the Vietnam generation. And now, as he mentions, we're on short final. We hope to begin and complete that education center at the Wall. Be right across Diagonal Walk. We start in 2016. We've got some money to raise, but I think we're gonna get there, and it'll be a tremendous way to link these names and their lives to their families and to their enduring values of what they stood for. So, Jan, we thank you and appreciate your leadership. The leadership of the troops who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, I might add other global battlefields, many unknown, General George Casey, Dave Petraeus, and others. It's wonderful to see you here today. You know, I just wrote an article for Army Magazine that came out, tried to underscore the leadership, the senior NCOs, the general officers, the brigade commanders of this conflict were selected in a Darwinian process. These people have been at war for a dozen years. You know, hundreds of thousands of them served multiple combat tours. Some specialized units, Air Force C-130s, Coast Guard, EOD, Ranger units, JSOC, have been 14, 15 tours. And by the way, I had to remind once a national security advisor, we're nearly 60,000 killed and wounded. This has been a tough war, and arguably, in my view, having watched the armed forces for most of my life, it's the most effective fighting force we ever fielded. They're just simply unbelievable. Today's going to be a very painful day for a lot of people. Nearly 7,000 killed. Guard, reserve, active, every branch of service, every ethnicity. And by the way, I sometimes should remind people, 160 some odd women killed in action and over 1,000 wounded fighting for this country on the battlefields. They've been an integral part of the combat force from the first. More than 450 readers, 9 hours. We will articulate their names and thank them for having stepped forward to protect us. General Jack Keane, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, told me a story. He said early on in the fighting in Afghanistan, he debriefed in the hospital survivors of 101st Airborne Platoon who almost all had been killed and wounded in a massive firefight with the Taliban. They were forward of a ridge line. They didn't pull back. He asked them, why didn't you pull back? Why didn't you get under cover? He said, sir, we couldn't do it. They murdered our people. This has been an incredibly courageous, dedicated force. Today, our purpose will be, let me just sort of underscore what we're doing. We're here to put in our memories what they stood for. We're here to learn from what they did. That's probably the greatest gift of this Vietnam Memorial, those 58,000 names, is to remind us to learn from their lives. Our purpose is also to comfort their families, their loved ones, their fellow veterans. And then finally, our purpose as Vietnam veterans is to link hands with them. God bless their service.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the daughter of Vietnam veteran John Penny and herself a first responder on 9/11 and F-16 pilot, Major Heather Penny.
I'm an airman, like my father before me. My dad still wears a big, fluffy Vietnam mustache. He flew A-7s, and he was a Sandy. As a Sandy pilot, he led combat search and rescue missions, locating downed aircrew who had been shot down and protecting the Jolly Greens who had lifted them out to safety. My dad later flew the F-4 Phantom, the first jet I ever fell in love with. But it wasn't just the jet that I loved. I fell in love with the brotherhood of pilots. I grew up listening to the cassette tapes of my dad's combat missions and to the stories that he and his squadron mates would tell of flying and fighting. Sometimes the stories were heroic, and sometimes they were tragic, but they were always inspiring. I wanted to be a fighter pilot too. I wanted to serve. But girls couldn't be fighter pilots. It took an act of Congress. And so in 2001, I was a young lieutenant in my fighter squadron. I was flying F-16s out of Andrews Air Force Base in the 121st, flying as much as I could and spending every spare moment in the vault studying. More than 10 years had passed since the Soviet Union fell, but there had been Desert Storm and Desert Fox and Allied Force, and if my nation called me, I was going to be ready. See, I had grown up idolizing these fighter pilots from Vietnam, courageous men who strapped on their jets every day, daring death and capture to do what their nation had asked of them. I wasn't going to let them down. So I was going to be ready. But we weren't. None of us were ready. It wasn't until the third plane hit the Pentagon that the Secret Service called. We'd already recalled the bullies from Air Force Air, a 3-ship of F-16s, at a bombing range in North Carolina, and they were landing. I still remember later listening to the ATIS, a taped loop that provides pilots information about the airfield. It said, "This is Andrews Air Force Base, information Bravo. Andrews Air Force Base is closed. Washington-class Bravo airspace is closed. Any aircraft attempting to enter Washington-class Bravo airspace will be shot down. Get airborne." Sass looked at me and said, "Lucky, you're with me. Raisin, you and Igor wait until you have missiles." We had no missiles on board, no weapons at all, only 105 rounds of training bullets, and even with the two of us, it wasn't enough. Sass would take the cockpit, I would take the tail. No one told us. We simply knew it had to be done. We knew what our duty was. Running to the jets, there was no time for pre-flight. Master battery on, JFIS start 2. 20%, going idle. 40%, temp looks good. Sec check, EPU check, flickest a bit 43. I'm taxiing. Pull the chocks. Crew chief is still underneath me. He's still plugged into the jet, pulling pins out of the airplane. Sass and I take off just seconds after Billy, who is bully 3. He doesn't have much gas. Dog tells him, "Make one pass down the river." They think there's another one coming in low over the river. Billy flies up the Potomac to Great Falls, then back down to where the river hooks left into the bay. Sass and I take off and we fly west into Pennsylvania, and we never found anything. A week or so later, our ops group commander was in the Pentagon. Tuna was spending quite a bit of time in the Pentagon then, and this is the story that he told us. He was walking down one of the many hallways, and the Pentagon was still burning. It burned for weeks afterwards, and it stung his sinuses and watered his eyes. He was in his flight suit, and someone recognized his patches. So he stopped Tuna and thanked him, and this is the story that he told. When the Pentagon was hit, they began to evacuate everyone. People went into south parking, out the metro entrance, and north parking. And if you're not familiar with north parking, it sits on the other side of a busy highway next to the Potomac, so you have to climb stairs and go over a bridge. The wind was out of the southwest that morning, light, so the smoke, the Pentagon was hit on the west side, it's drifting over the center of the building and pretty much right over north parking. There's a child development center, military daycare, that's at the base of that bridge on the Pentagon side. Everyone's evacuating. People are streaming out and across that bridge and at the ground level, and the women are evacuating the daycare. 3 babies to a crib, 4 toddlers to a buggy. But there aren't enough of them. They can't carry the babies and the children up the stairs and across the bridge to the other side. So they're giving babies away. Please, sir, take this child. I can't take them all across. And the people, normally in a crowd, it's a dull roar because everyone's talking. But this is utterly silent. This is before BlackBerries and phones were ubiquitous. They knew something was coming, but they didn't totally know. And the smoke, you could smell the burning jet fuel and the ashes floating to the ground. So the dread of the unknown. You know there's another, but you don't know. And then Billy goes roaring over them, full afterburner at 300 feet over the Pentagon, and the crowd erupted into cheers because they knew that now they were safe. American fighter jets were overhead. We were airborne, and we weren't going to let anyone hurt them. Everything was going to be okay. We would keep them safe. We spent the next 9 months flying combat air patrols over our capital, and we were scud hunters in western Iraq during the opening hostilities of OIF. And we've been back numerous times, just like everyone else. That day was just the beginning. Occasionally, this will come up with my dad and his friends, and I'll receive a forwarded email expressing gratitude for what I was willing to do that day and what all of us have done since. But I truly believe that what we did was nothing special. Any one of us would have done the same thing. Courage, service, dedication, sacrifice, it's in our DNA as Americans. This is who we are. This is our heritage. I know this because I know the veterans who served before me, and I know the young servicemen and women who have joined our military service since. I am but one of hundreds of thousands who have pledged my life to defend our country, our Constitution, and our way of life. I'm not the first, and I am not the last. We are here today to honor those who have given the most in courage, service, dedication, and sacrifice. Not to mourn, but to remember and commemorate. Let their stories inspire us. For what they did was great, and let us in the course of the ceremony and the speaking of their names remind ourselves that the greatness that lived in them resides in all of us. They have honorably borne the legacy and heritage of those veterans who have served and gone before, and may their courage and sacrifice live on in us and those who will come after. May we honor them not just in our words and their names, but in our deeds. Thank you.
To share one of those stories, the Gold Star mother of Christopher Stonecipher, please welcome Ruth Stonecipher.
My son, Christopher Stonecipher, was in Ranger School when 9/11 happened. When I finally got to talk with him, I asked him what his buddies thought about what had just happened to our country. He said the Rangers were all chomping at the bit to right the wrong. I asked him how he felt, and his response was, "A lot of good men are going to die." You see, he was a vegan, vegetarian philosophy major, Army ROTC at the University of Montana. And at age 27, he decided to enlist to do the fun stuff that the Rangers do before his body wore out. As the old man over most of the 20-year-old fellow Rangers in his battalion, he knew instinctively what was going to happen in the struggle against terrorism. The next night on maneuvers, he stepped off into a very dark 4-foot ditch and sprained his ankle. He tried to stick it out for about 4 more days, not telling anyone about the injury. But when he could not put his boot on over the swelling, they sent him back to his Ranger battalion with a cast on his foot. On October 9th, when the call for the Rangers to go to Afghanistan was issued, Chris cut his cast off so he wouldn't be left behind. Chris called me that afternoon, but could not disclose the danger he might be going to experience. The Rangers operate as special forces, so stealth is a part of that code. He just wasn't himself on the phone, and I should have called him right back. He boarded the C-130s that night with his squad. 10 days later, at 2 a.m., I couldn't sleep and turned on the TV, only to learn that our country had started its response to 9/11. CNN was showing green night vision coverage of major military operations in Kandahar. At the bottom of the screen, it said 2 Rangers had been killed in a helicopter accident in support of the mission. My thoughts went out to those 2 poor families of the first to be killed in action. The next morning, when the man in the green uniform came to our front door, I knew Chris had been right in his prediction. After an incredibly long silence, when you finally give them permission to speak the dreaded words, they simply ask, "Are you Ruth Stonecipher?" Then, "Do you have a son named Christopher Stonecipher?" Then I heard, "We regret to inform you," and my ears stopped working as my mind safely transported me back to the hospital room on August 20th, 1973, as I held this sweet child in my arms for the first time. Immediately after the names of the 2 Rangers killed in the helicopter crash were released to the media, our phone rang nonstop. Every news outlet wanted interviews with Chris's family. I wasn't interested in appearing on national TV looking like deer in the headlights, so I pretty much avoided the landline. I was living in a foggy numbness. Our family was at the airport in Philadelphia to welcome Chris home and to show the world that we were a proud military family. Chris's brother was a chief warrant officer on active duty in the Army. Chris's dad and my brother were retired from the Navy. They were all in uniform, along with more family and friends, and many young Rangers that were there to carry Chris's flag-draped casket off the plane from Germany. I did not know what a Gold Star mother was when I became one. Thanksgiving of that year, my firstborn son, Rick, the warrant officer, said he had applied for my Gold Star pin. I said, "That's nice. What is that?" When I got home, I looked it up on the internet and called to get an application to join the American Gold Star Mothers. A month later, 3 moms who had lost their sons in Vietnam met me for lunch. They had between them more than 90 years of experience dealing with what I had just been thrown into as a Gold Star. They gave me their gift of wisdom. I am grateful that the Vietnam-era moms have shared their memorial to their sons with the newest Gold Stars. We always feel a very special welcome here. The candlelight vigil held at the wall in 2006 was the first time I shared my grief with the public. When you think of it, all of our fallen sons and daughters are there together in the black granite reflection. I am grateful to all of the Vietnam veterans I have met along the way of this very reluctant journey, who have supported us and listened to our stories. I am thankful for the Vietnam moms who have showed us the grace and dignity they have lived their lives when the country seemed to lose its moral compass. They are a true inspiration to us as we continue the Gold Star legacy. Thank you for listening to the story about my son.